Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Alex Lee. Today I will talk about the principles of ethical research. To practice ethical research, we shall adhere to the fundamental ethical principles. Here we divide them into four major aspects: beneficence, respect, justice, and fidelity. They guide researchers through research processes. Commonly, a study may not fully conform to all principles perfectly. It is, however, essential to keep all the procedures above acceptable standards. When we first plan a research study, we shall assess the benefit, harm brought to the participants, or in a bigger picture, the society. Researchers shall always strive to promote welfare maximally through conducting significant research studies benefiting the community. We are taking advantages of our participants in certain ways. At the very least, they need to spend time on it. In other words, the minimal criterion is to make their time worthwhile. That is why a meaningful research study is important. Nonetheless, risks and benefits come in many ways, and the question is balancing them. One way to assess benefits is to conceptualize the risk-to-benefit ratios of the studies. There is no formal calculation of these equations. It simply represents an idea of minimizing the risk while maximizing the benefit. Risk and harm to participants come in many forms. Physical harm is the most straightforward, and most researchers would intentionally avoid. We shall also be cautious of unintentional and non-physical harm. Non-physical harm may come in a psychological form. For instance, stress-inducing scenarios are sometimes used in psychological experiments to study stress-relieving paradigms or to measure their physiological correlates. Sometimes in education research, and challenging or impossible tasks will be adapted to test how the participants face the challenge. The stress level shall be reasonable and not greater than usual situations in daily life. Similar to harm, benefits come in many forms. Meaningful research would often benefit society and do a greater good. In other words, participants give up their time to help improve the society. Sometimes the participants also benefit. For example, participants would have the opportunity to try new medicines, vaccines, or therapies which are not yet available to the general public. This kind of benefit is significant to clinical patients. However, there is also additional risk of these new interventions. The risk-to-benefit ratio is not an objective calculation. Some participants may experience extra harm, and this situation may be overlooked with participants from minority groups. Minority groups such as patients and children with special needs may develop different reactions to the research methodology which are pretty acceptable to others. For example, an 1-hour experimental section shall be okay with most participants, but probably unbearable for children with attention deficits. Similarly, this group of participants shall not be exposed to harm larger than their daily experiences. A research design shall fully respect the participants, including their rights in participations and withdrawal. Participants shall fully understand their rights in not participating before the study begins. They shall be under undue influence in deciding their participations. For instance, students may feel obligated to participate in their professor's experiment. They may hold a misconception that refusing to participate may influence their course grades. It is, however, common that some universities and departments require students to participate in experiments to earn course credits. Students shall be provided with alternatives for not participating in the experiments. For example, completing alternative assignments to earn those credits. Similar situations include patients, prisoners, etc. Patients may feel the urge to participate in an experiment to be cured. Prisoners may also think that not participating in an experiment would negatively influence their release time and treatments. Particular care shall be paid to vulnerable participants. Therefore, an informed consent procedure is critical. The consent procedure shall explain the participants' rights, which, as mentioned before, include their right not to participate in the experiment and their rights to withdraw at any point in the study. The withdrawal rights shall include the experimental process and the right to withdraw after the experiment. The researchers shall destroy the participants' data and information in such a case. We shall also let the participants know how long the research team will keep the data. traditional practice is to keep the data for 2 to 5 years after project completions. However, it's quite common to destroy only personal identifiers and keep the anonymous data indefinitely nowadays. One way or the other, the researchers shall keep the participants well informed. The consent form shall also describe the research objectives and procedures, allowing the participants to anticipate what they will experience. It is also a good time to describe the benefit, potential risks, and harm to them. Further, the participants shall learn about the person in charge and the contact persons that they can follow up with later. The procedure is usually conducted through written form, which would ensure all participants are presented with the same information. Both paper-based and electronic-based consent are considered to be written. If the participants cannot read or situations does not allow it, verbal consent shall be conducted and shall be recorded. Here comes an issue. Some participants cannot understand the consent information due to age, education, or disability conditions. A common way is to have their representatives consent to the participations. And the representatives are usually their parents or guardians. If the situation allows, the researchers shall also try to obtain the participants' assent in participations. Having the participants or their representatives sign a consent is a form of positive consent. Negative consent is used in some setups. In a school-based study, usually the school will provide positive written consent. It is, however, inconvenient for the school to collect positive consent from all students and their parents. Under these circumstances, perhaps they would be provided with an opportunity to decline participations. Usually, they will receive a notice or memo informing them of the study information and will be reminded about their rights in not participating. Students will return a notice to decline participations if they do not want to play a part in it. Otherwise, they will be considered as agreed to participate. There is also an additional issue. Sometimes the student may still join the activities, but their data will not be included in the analysis and shall be removed. Another setup which may use negative consent is a naturalistic observations. Informing the participants before the observations will probably ruin its objective of observing authentic and natural behaviors. Thus, the researcher may seek their consent after the observations. At this stage, it is also good to have their positive written consent. An important note is that negative consent shall only be used in studies possessing minimal risk. An interesting point about the deception study is its contradictory nature with the consent procedures. In some setups, the researchers would not want to disclose their research objectives to the participants too early. Some may even deceive their participants and telling them inaccurate information or even assessment results. The first consideration is that the deception shall not lead to any long-lasting harm and risk. Secondly, deception is the only way to achieve the research objective. Lastly, the participants shall be properly debriefed in detail as soon as possible. Accurate and truthful information shall be provided to them in the debriefing sections. Justice means treating every participant equally and ensuring a fair treatment to them. The first point to note is the participants' backgrounds. Recall that we have discussed that the participants should not undergo more than daily life risk and harm. As mentioned before, sometimes we may overlook the fact that minority groups may think and feel differently from us. While average adults will feel okay to sit quietly to complete a 30 or even 60 minutes reading exercise. It is not as easy for kids with attention issues. It is probably okay for us to recall our most stressful experience in the past month. The same request may induce unexpected outcomes in people with major depressions and anxiety disorders. Researchers shall take their special needs into account. In other words, the risk-to-benefit ratios differ across groups. An experimental setup usually includes a control group for comparisons to study the hypothesized effect of an intervention. Very often, the research objective is stated during subject recruitment. Therefore, participants would expect they will receive the interventions. For instance, during the COVID pandemic, there were many research studies about vaccine efficacy and effectiveness in protections. Participants would typically expect to receive the jab. Nonetheless, the research design usually involves a placebo group where the participants do not receive the vaccine without knowing it. It is crucial to provide the participants in the control group an opportunity to receive the actual vaccines within the study. We have discussed evaluating the ethical standard of research studies in the design and participant recruitment phases. While most of the discussed principles emphasize research planning, keeping promises and sticking to those design rationales are critical. Researchers shall remain faithful to their promises. Fidelity plays a part in research in the execution of the plan and reporting the findings. Most institutions have research ethics committee to gauge the ethical standard of research projects according to those stated principles. Researchers shall adhere to their approved research plans closely. Although changes in research procedures are not uncommon, substantial changes involving sensitive ethical issues shall be cautious. For example, switching the target group to a minority group without prior approval shall not be allowed. Some changes may sound more forgivable. For example, changing the sample size due to difficulty in participant recruitment will sound more acceptable in terms of ethics. However, it may still influence the research community unexpectedly, which will be discussed in further detail in the later modules about replicability. This principle also applies to other research parties, such as collaborating agencies or schools. Researchers shall remain truthful in their communications and deliver the services or outcome as promised. In addition to the executions of the research plan, researchers shall also uphold their fidelity standard in reporting their research findings. It will be covered in the modules about plagiarism in detail.